Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. First and foremost, thank you for joining us. My name's Kevin Radigan. I'm a senior account executive here at Acrisure Cyber Services, and we've got a great learning opportunity for you all today. Our main presenter today is Enrique Melicara. He comes to you with a tremendous amount of experience and wealth of knowledge. Enrique, why don't I kind of pass it over to you to kind of talk through yourself, who you are, and kind of jump into some of the content?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everybody. Like Kevin said, Enrique Melicara, Director of Security Operations and Strategy here at Acture Cyber Services. So I oversee our managed detection and response offering, which is inclusive of our SOC analyst team, incident response, as well as technical pre-sales for the security tooling that we offer. There's some consulting as well on the cyber liability insurance, side of things, and everything in between. So um, these days, very much hands on keyboard from a day to day perspective with the SecOps team, but also keeping an eye ahead on the threat landscape, the vision for ACS as we go forward, and always staying abreast on the vendors in the ecosystem and the investments they're making therein. Um, Today's conversation is really focused around the 2026 threat landscape. That is to say, what are the things you should be concerned about? And most of that is going to be informed by observations and things that have evolved throughout 2025. So when we talk about 2025, it's been said to me that it was a watershed year. And so there's a few fundamental shifts that we've identified in the threat landscape, different ways that threat actors are carrying out attacks, shifts in what's important, especially as it relates to identity, and really what I would refer to as kind of a breaking point for identity security. And that is to say, how we're protecting the accounts that we're working in and out of every day. Um, AI, everybody's favorite buzzword of the last 2 years or so, year and a half. But proliferation of AI has definitely come to play into that. And so, ultimately, we're seeing shifts for attackers, we're seeing shifts for defenders, and we're going to dig into it here. So, um, you know. 2025 being that kind of year of convergence I heard it referred to as a watershed year. And I myself had to look up what a watershed was. Geographic science is not a strong suit of mine, but for anybody else like myself that is not aware, it's a where a number of different water flows kind of converge together to become a singular flow. And so, when we put that in the context of cybersecurity across 2025, what we're saying is we've had multiple long trends that have been somewhat parallel and leaning into each other, but finally come into take a final form in a singular way and fundamentally change the landscape therein. Firstly, the convergence of threat actors, right? When we're talking about traditionally disparate groups, ransomware, access brokers, etc., now working together in ways that weren't previously seen. And ultimately finding a model that works for them as it relates to ransomware and extortion. And unfortunately, it's not going away. This businesses face a multifaceted threat landscape, right? And that the old threats that we've seen, those traditional protections and attacks are still there, but there's also simultaneously this surge in cloud and software as a service exploitation, and so we're gonna dig into that too. The other side to it is the fact that identity compromise has kind of taken over um, ransomware and endpoint compromise as loss leaders. So when we look at it from a purely monetary perspective, most breaches started with an identity, a compromise of some sort. And so, all those things are happening faster. The speed of attacks, the rate of attacks, ultimately being fueled by the proliferation of AI, um, and the reduce or the reduction in barrier to entry for some of these exploits to be pulled off. Um, and at the end of the day, you put all that together, and it means that some of the traditional tooling and approaches that we've used still very much needed. Those problems never really went away, but they're no longer adequate in and of themselves. Traditional legacy defenses just aren't quite enough anymore. So, identity as the new perimeter. What does that mean, right? Um, it means that's what is being focused on when threat actors are putting their efforts, and that's what's being attacked. Historically, there was kind of the castle and moat approach. We've got an office, we've got a firewall. Anything in the office is good, anything on the outside is bad. That worked for a while. We then saw the proliferation of ransomware, really an evolution of ransomware gangs, malware gangs kind of propping up. And that perimeter then kind of moved to the endpoint. And that is to say, right, there was a big industry focus on protecting the endpoint. We saw the evolution of antivirus products into endpoint detection and response tools, right? The focus on SIM implementation and XDR, and pulling log sets from those endpoints for enhanced visibility. And now where we're at is ultimately, um, the fact that a majority of incidents, as we said, do start with identity compromise. Whether that's your Office 365 account, maybe your Google Workspace shop, maybe it's a local Active Directory in the office. But compromising the identity bypasses a lot of those traditional tools. Your firewall, your EDRs, your network, segmentation doesn't really matter if I have access to a valid account. And the pain point really is that historically, many businesses were not monitoring their identities in the same way they were monitoring the network and the firewalls. So, you know, why now? Why is it such a big business to go after the identity? When we look at it, uh, access brokers are not recent development, but it's definitely grown over time. There's organizations or groups out there that solely exist to just get that initial foot in the door. A lot of times that takes the form of phishing. You click the link, they steal your session token, they steal your password or something to that effect. And it's easier for them to go off and sell it to make a quick buck, instead of having to go through the hassle of moving laterally, deploying ransomware, extortion, etc. So the amount of lift there just isn't quite as much, and the payoff is fairly immediate. Um, you know, Malware, in that context, a lot of it now is also just info stealers. There are malicious packages in the traditional sense, but many of them now are going after the credentials stored in your browser, your Chrome, your Firefox, your Edge, and they're simply taking those identities, those accounts, so that they can be used to gain access elsewhere, or again to be sold by an access broker. And there is an entire credential marketplace out there where this information is being traded and bought and sold. So, ultimately, identity monitoring and identity governance is no longer optional. Um, we have a variety of controls at our fingertips to utilize there. There's conditional access policies, and those are used in a way to um, put requirements on what you need in order to access that account, even if you have a valid username and password. Right, multi-factor authentication being one, but maybe it's token monitoring for anomalous tokens. Maybe it's um, device compliance policies. Yeah, right. You have to have these services running our tooling, um, and ultimately, we're at a point where, and this is where I say it's a breaking point. We're at a point where not implementing these controls is leaving the door wide open for a lot of organizations. Um, so, um, moving on from the identity piece, something that also happened over the not just the course of last year, but was very visible last year, was the kind of expansion of or additional focus on attacking cloud and hybrid, environments. So um, your software as a service platform, right? Your migration from your on-premises file server to SharePoint repositories. That didn't that didn't get rid of your risk. It merely transferred it. It may have mitigated some of it by passing it off to a vendor in some way, shape, or form, but ultimately, When we talk about cloud infrastructure, when we talk about software as a service platforms, they follow what's referred to as a shared responsibility model. And that is to say, your vendor is responsible for A, B, and C, mostly the underlying infrastructure. But it's up to you, the client, the customer, again, whether that's Office 365, Azure, AWS, you name it, Box.com, they leave it up to you to secure those credentials to make sure that your organization has a culture that follows good password hygiene, and to secure kind of the front end of those systems. So, the providers are very savvy, and their end user license agreements, their master service agreements are locked down pretty tight. So when it does happen that a cloud compromise takes place, whether it's again Microsoft Identity or some other avenue, there's not a lot of recourse to go after that provider because of that shared responsibility model. Um, and what are they attacking? We've already talked about the identity aspect of that, but they're also targeting misconfigurations. A lot of the cloud compromises that we see nowadays are the result of a particular toggle or setting being, uh, turned on or off the wrong way, or leading to an exposure that is publicly visible. If we look at this for like a mail system, right? We used to host our own mail server that was internal. Even if that toggle was off when it should have been on, that administrative console was only internally facing, and that perimeter was protecting us. When we move that to the cloud, that access, that administrative console, right? It's publicly exposed, and so whether it's that or a public-facing resource, maybe some virtual machines we have in Azure, there's a lot of potential exposure that is the result of maybe a lack of expertise, a lack of time, but misconfigurations at the end of the day. So, ultimately, what we're saying here is attackers watched the move from on-premises infrastructure to cloud, and that brought about a lot of opportunity. Because now, if I am a threat actor and I'm going after a particular platform, we saw this with Salesforce as an example. Um, it's a big name in the industry. They have a lot of subscribers. If I compromise a client on an individual level, or if I compromise Salesforce themselves from a platform perspective, that's a win either way. In one of those cases, it's only affecting your business, and another, it's affecting thousands, if not tens of thousands. So the return on investment there is just astronomical if they're able to pull that off. Um, there's a number of other campaigns that we saw that where we saw that take place. Move It was one. Go Anywhere. Oracle was another one where there's a concerted focus. But again, whether they compromise you individually or at the platform level, it's a payday, and that's ultimately why, or a big reason why there's been a shift in focus from a threat actor perspective. So, what we're saying here is the tooling of yesterday, not necessarily effective at fighting today's problems. Um, for cloud infrastructure specifically, you hear the term CNAPP thrown around, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. CNAPPs were built as a response to this problem. It's a native way to get visibility, not just at what is in that cloud environment, but understanding and extrapolating on the interconnectedness of what's in that environment. So that public exposure we were talking about, maybe it's a service you run, a website that's publicly exposed with a vulnerability. That vulnerability may be, not the worst thing in the world. Maybe it does lead to compromise on that host. But what a CNAT platform is able to do, or part of the power of it, is that it's able to show you, yeah, that's just one piece of the pie. But if you do that and you chain that to a different exploit and you move laterally over here, it really shows you the impact that that singular exposure could bring to your business. And so the correlation across the cloud environment, the visibility, is where what's needed to protect nowadays. All right. So on to what's one of my favorite parts is kind of the ransomware aspect of this and how things evolved over 2025. Ransomware has been around for quite some time since the big driver for cyber liability insurance and why carriers even started insuring that risk to begin with. Um, and there's been a lot of different changes and evolutions over the way. But in 2025, what I found interesting personally is the fact that in the macro sense, the rate of payments were going down. So what does that mean? That means businesses are maybe they're actually buying into cyber liability insurance. They've got some and they're able to recover from that event a little bit easier because of the financial reimbursement they get. Maybe there's a wider adoption of controls and tooling, business continuity planning, disaster recovery. Your backups are immutable, all that stuff, um, leading to a less of a need to pay out on that ransomware event, pay out to that threat actor. But the interesting thing is, while the rate of payments were going down, ransomware activities actually ramped up. We had roughly 70 new groups, ransomware threat actor groups that were identified in the second half of 2025, bringing it to a total of roughly 120-ish, I forget the exact number, active ransomware groups that are out there, targeting businesses, big and small alike. Um, the other piece of this is that the overwhelming majority of ransomware activity is targeted at the United States and businesses within the United States. I forget again the exact statistic, but it's well over 50% of all ransomware um, events that are reported are taking place against U.S. companies. So, while it's great that the rate of payments going down, businesses we can kind of infer from that are becoming a little bit more resilient, um, and maybe cyber liability insurance is getting more widely adopted. But that's kind of the extent of the good news, because while businesses are adapting and becoming a little bit more resilient, threat actors are also figuring out how they can go about ensuring a payout in some way, shape, or form. And that has really kind of formed by what was referred to as double extortion, wherein there's kind of a two-pronged approach to a ransomware event these days, if not three. But the first is the ransomware activity itself. We've encrypted your data, we've brought you down. You're now not able to make any revenue because your business processes are not functional. That's the first, right? Pay me and we'll give you the key to decrypt everything and you're back on your way. The second, though, even if you do pay out on that first one, is all right. Well, we were in your environment for a while, and we actually exfiltrated some data. You as a business owner, your data, your customer information is most valuable to yourself. And so the second approach is the extortion aspect, where they say, if you don't want the bad press, if you don't want the compliance breach, you're going to pay us to not disclose that data, to not put it out there on the web for everybody to see and get you into hot water. Um, and so we've even seen some groups that completely skip the ransomware activity. They get in, they exfiltrate the data, they don't encrypt it, because I guess from a legal perspective, the thought is it's one less charge against you because you're not destroying infrastructure. But they're just doing the extortion aspect of it to make money. And under threat of bad press, regulatory pressures, that kind of thing. So that's the first kind of evolution.
Enrique, just out of curiosity, when you talk about extortion, I think about several years ago, Sony was hacked, and it looked like it was North Korea because they were about to put a movie out. They were about to put a movie out, and it seemed like they were leaking all the all Sony's information, all sorts of sensitive emails. So that was done in an attempt for extortion. I'm not sure what money was paid out, but it just want to call that out as an example.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very visible one, and definitely one. Sony as an organization, definitely enterprise grade, right? They've got the tools and the resources to defend against a lot of that, but it could happen to anybody. And while a lot of that is the hey, we're gonna threaten to reveal that data to expose it. there's a lot of cases out there where that extortion is under threat of violence, and there's some groups that are very notorious for making threats to executives, to staff, like and there's real physical harm that could be risked there. So that extortion could take a few different forms. It tends uh, to be financial, but it can be a number of things. So yeah, great call out, Kevin. The double extortion tactic has been around for a while. That's not just the 2025 piece, but that in combination with this next part here, I think really kind of drives it home. And it's that when we talk about all the ransomware groups that we've identified, they were predominantly disparate and historically, so they were operating independently. You had some rivalries between groups, and different things, and some of them were stronger in one area of expertise versus another. That is to say, initial access versus ransomware versus the extortion or lateral movement, you name it. And what we saw over 2025 was ultimately collaboration. You had groups that historically did not work together. We're not friendly. Suffice to say, come together to pull off some big jobs. There's a lot of advanced persistent threats out there. You hear them as APT groups. The example I like to share is you had a couple of powerhouses. Scattered Spider is one that's really good in social engineering. Shiny Hunters, Lapsus, ultimately formed to make Scattered Shiny Lapsus. The names of them is also kind of fun at times. But it's bringing a new way for them to scale, to take on larger targets, to bring in certain subject matter expertise, and that wasn't really seen before. And as much as I'd like to say the law enforcement, right, whether that's national, state level, international. As much as I'd like to say law enforcement is going to break that apart, that's really not the case. We saw multiple targeted takedowns in 2025 that ultimately were just temporary disruptions of those groups and their associated infrastructure. So they're really here to stay, and the ransomware um, ecosystem is not going away. And the last piece to just kind of really drive that home is the fact that they have a business model, right? It's not just the hey, we're targeting the singular customer, the singular business, and we're gonna do the ransomware, extort them. Ransomware as a service is now very much alive and well. These groups are monetizing their tooling, their payloads. Not only can I have a monthly subscription for a ransomware toolkit, there's a full support staff on a live chat I can use to when I'm having trouble with my ransomware, I can't get it to work the way I want to at this place. And they're there to ultimately enable and disseminate that to reduce the barrier to entry. A lot of times there's a fee model or some type of percentage compensation that goes back to the group that you're subscribing from. Some groups have enforced minimums. So if you were to take a payout from an organization that you compromised, it has to be 1, 5, 10% of their annual revenue. Otherwise, you're not allowed to use their tooling. And so it's gotten very, very mature in a short amount of time and enabled the kind of scale that we haven't seen before. But the takeaway across all that is it's I don't believe it's ever going away. So it's something that we have to be cognizant of. It's something that we have to defend against. Yeah. Um, the
Enrique, also on I heard what you were saying about, I've seen similar stats about typically the ransom ask is about 10% of the revenue of the organization. Um, when it comes to what if you don't pay that ransom? What is the average recovery time for those organizations that don't pay the ransom? And if somebody has a solution in there that is air gap, that's immutable, how how much quicker are they? Is their time to recovery in those scenarios?
Yeah, the average time to recovery, I'm not sure on the specific statistic. In my mind, I think it's going to be very variable depending on your business, your vertical, the amount of planning that you've done to ahead of that event. Um, I think as it relates to small business and micro small business, I forget exactly where the statistic was from, but it's roughly a majority of small businesses that incur a ransomware event are out of business within 6 months. A lot of time that's due to business disruption, and because of the amount of time it takes for them to get back up and running, they can't really compensate for the lost revenue during that period. The other piece to it is the reputational aspect, right? If my customers know that something happened, my data's out there, and it's because of your what they may perceive as negligence or lack of preparedness, right? They're going to move elsewhere. And so, when we talk about recovery, I don't think we can think about it in just a business interruption. It's not just business interruption anymore. It's about reputation. It's about data disclosure and compliance. Again, compliance pressure, right? If I'm having to disclose, or I'm incurring fines, or maybe I have customers in the EU and I'm actually bound by GDPR compliance. So that breach, I have to, there's funds that go into notifying everybody affected, and timeline requirements, and you name it. So it, the recovery aspect very much important, and I mean, with what's on the slide, right? Business continuity, disaster recovery, still very much a pillar of what we have to do. But the takeaway there for me is, if sensitive data leaves the org, the damage is already done, whether there was a business interruption or not, whether systems are online or not. Once that sensitive data leaves, all bets are off. So, all right. And then, of course, everybody's favorite buzzword, AI. We said in the beginning, speed of execution is really what's been accelerated by AI, and this is seen across pretty much every exposure you can think of. As it relates to business email compromise, right? The volume has shot up. Things like phishing, voice phishing, and social engineering attempts, we're seeing unprecedented scale. Um, the number of scam fun scam or yeah the number of individuals that lost funds due to a scam, and that is to say something that started with a voice call or text, um, grew pretty substantially, and this is all driven by generative AI mostly, right? Deep fakes. We can do voice cloning. We've got complete organizational context. When me as a threat actor, I craft that phishing email. It's no longer, as I like to say, the Saudi Arabian prince that if you give me 2 grand, I'll give you five. It's an email targeted at a very specific individual in your environment. They know what their role is. They know the third parties that they interact with are. Maybe I'm impersonating one of those third parties. Maybe I've even compromised one of those third parties, right? And I'm impersonating them and using an actual invoice that's just been tweaked a little bit. But ultimately, all these things are being driven at the speed of which are being driven by AI. One of the pieces that I really this sticks out to me for is as it relates to exposure management and vulnerability management. Let's go back to that web server example, whether that's in the cloud or on premises. If I've got a vulnerability on there, the delay between 0-day disclosure, that vulnerability dropping and being made known to the public, and attackers targeting it, has dropped dramatically. We're talking hours before you see exploitation in mass across the internet. And not only is the speed to exploitation accelerated, but the amount of time it takes them to move laterally from that compromised asset to the rest of your environment. The lateral move time is reduced. The dwell time is reduced. Time to encrypt greatly reduced. And ultimately, it's not that AI has created new attacks per se. You can say that AI and the usage of AI has brought new exposures, but it didn't necessarily create new attacks. it just accelerated the rate of those attacks. It made it faster. It made it easier to perform those attacks. Um, and we see some, and then we'll talk about it here in a bit. But we also see AI from a defender perspective, right? Accelerating a lot of the ways and augmenting a lot of the ways that we're defending against this. So just like a threat actor can use automated vulnerability reconnaissance, let's call it, to identify what can be exploited, your exposures. Um, us as defenders can do the same thing, right? It's important that we're building that into our tooling, and we're applying AI, whether that's language models, whether that's generative or computer vision, right? For image scanning, things like that. It's important that we're aligning with technology providers, with vendors that are applying that in a real way. Um, I'd go to a few conferences throughout the year, and it always blows my mind of everybody's got AI on their banner, on their marketing material in some way, shape, or form, but maybe 5, 10% of those vendors are actually doing anything real with it. And so, it's always been a part of our ethos to align with either industry disruptors that are applying AI or proven industry leaders. So, if you're familiar with our toolkit, Abnormal Security, actually rebranded as Abnormal AI on the email security and identity protection side. Sentinel One for endpoint detection response and XDR has always had behavioral engines built in, and so on and so forth. So it's going to get to a point where tooling without that is simply not effective. And so that kind of brings us to the industry evolving, our tooling evolving, our tactics, like we just said, and going from that castle and moat, the old perimeter mindset, to a resilience, posture first kind of approach. Um, and there's a handful of ways to do that. Well, a variety of ways to do that, but a handful we're going to talk about. Um, the first that I like to say is, cybersecurity is enterprise risk, and I use enterprise kind of ambiguously. But really, any business, whether you're enterprise, mid market, SMB, micro SMB, cyber risk is business risk, and it's no longer the case that it's Dave, the IT guy, who's been going it alone for the last 5 years, and he's great. And we're just going to say, Dave, make your best judgment. That us as a business, we need to quantify that risk, right? What is the impact of buying into that tool or not buying into that tool, of fixing that vulnerability or not, of migrating away from that legacy end of support line of business application or not? We need to be able to quantify that and translate it to the balance sheet so that the business, right, administrative leadership, executive leadership, can accept that risk or choose to transfer it, mitigate it, etc. It can't be poor Dave, the IT guy, anymore, that ends up getting fired when something happens because, well, he was in charge of it. Um, we need to build policies, right, as it relates to governance of our organization. We need to define what it is we're allowing within our business from a process perspective. It doesn't have to be monolithic. When I talk to a lot of, especially SMB, about the policy aspect, it's well, we're not a Fortune 500 company, we're not a Fortune 1000 company. Very much appreciate that, but there's some things as it relates to policy and governance that are universal, regardless of the size of your org. Right? We just have to right size it to what makes sense for your business. Um, and at the end of the day, again, regardless of the size of your organization, what that is doing for us is it's showing due diligence and it's showing due care. Due diligence in that we did the discovery needed to identify what could hurt our business. And due care is that when we made that identification, we treated it appropriately. And, not legal advice, but generally, when it comes to a breach or some type of data exfiltration, and you get to the courtroom, right, that's ultimately what we're trying to prove, that we made a reasonable effort to do our best in those two categories. So, cybersecurity is enterprise risk, is business risk. It needs to be a culture shift. Um, the all the stuff floating around there, the operationalizing threat intelligence, right? When we talk about the exposures, what attackers are exploiting, and everything that is floating out there in the World Wide Web. Um, yes, we're pushing the updates, we're monitoring for some of that, we're remediating, but we have to get even more proactive than that. It's not just about identifying what can be abused in the infrastructure. It's about identifying what has already left the organization and how that can be used against us. And so, takes the form of lead credential monitoring, right? When a Telegram chat is talking about a user account that they're selling username and password and a session token for $20 on the web, we want to know about that. It's identifying when folks on ransomware forums are talking about our business, whether it's targeting or in passing. We want to know about that, and ultimately, that information, that proactive reconnaissance, drives proactive response. Right? Those leak credentials, maybe we do see that and we can reset those before they're actually sold and used against us, right? If that ransomware forum is talking about our business, what's the context? Are they gearing up for an attack? Did they say what the exploit was that they're going to use? Let's find it and patch it and fix it. Or maybe it's our name was only mentioned because there were some documents in a breach of a partner of ours and they got compromised, right? Let's talk to that third party about what happened, how much of our data was exposed, right? Hold the supply chain accountable. And so, as we continue to do all this, we have to be more forward thinking. We have to be more proactive, and the threat intelligence aspect of it is critical to that. Um, AI, we talked about it. It accelerates all the things. I've already kind of touched on this from a defender perspective, but it's got to be in the tooling and it's got to be in a way that makes sense. For me, you hear a lot of talk about AI displacing jobs and that type of thing. In my mind, it's not a replacement for the human, especially on the security side of it. There's always been a shortage of seasoned security staff to fill the roles, but it's about augmenting what they're doing, about being a force multiplier for them, right? Allowing us to identify user compromise faster, to respond faster, to remediate faster. It's something that is going to allow us to scale to meet those threat actor advancements, and take them head on. So, and then there's some things that never go away, right? Zero trust, it had been a buzzword for a long time. Didn't really take form until NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology. They released their zero trust maturity model. It's on V2 now. So it's actually much more tangible, right? And when we talk about zero trust, a lot of that is segmentation, right? Carving out your networks, making sure that impact is contained in a blast radius. It's about credential management, right? Best practices there, making sure that we're separating duties for those credentials and not one admin has keys to the kingdom for everything. Zero trust is a methodology that gets applied to all of IT. It's not just security. And if we're architecting, if we're road mapping, if we're building with that in mind, us as an organization are going to be that much more resilient. Um, and on that point, right, we hedge our bets. So it's on a long enough timeline, everybody's going to have an event, an incident, a breach. It's just the state of things, and we have to plan for that, right? And resilience can take the form of cyber liability insurance, as well as its distant cousin, technical E&O. I always say everybody should have both, right? Insurance policies right sized um, for that business. Make sure there aren't any weird riders or sublimits, things like that. Transfer some of that risk to the carrier to provide reactive assurance when that day comes. So, what's the takeaway from all this? What's the top level, information that us as business owners or risk advisors should be taking away from this talk? I hope it's that one, cybercrime, ransomware, all of it has really become industrialized. It's no longer something that we can have in the peripheral or avoid altogether. It's become industrialized and it's not going away. Um, the identity, right, is a focus not just for threat actors but also for defenders. We need to make sure that the um, infrastructure where that resides is being controlled in the right way, protected in the right way, and that we have the tooling to identify compromise as early in the attack chain as possible to prevent it from becoming a bigger issue. The perimeter strategy, our firewalls, the endpoint detection and response tools, all of that is very much still needed. But we need to focus on endpoint, or sorry, identity security while we're doing all the rest of it. Um, every business needs real-time identity monitoring to identify that compromise. Um, and how do we address all of that? Um, I think it's what you see on the screen here, right? We already talked about cyber risk kind of being business risk and executive level or administrative level accountability. Take stock of those identities, take an inventory, check your controls, centralize authentication as much as we can so that we can enforce controls universally. Um, whether it's your SaaS platforms, Office 365, Box.com, you name it. We need to know that it exists. We need to know and understand how those identities are managed in those environments. And we need to apply policy to enforce really rigid controls on who gains access and when. Um, the AI aspect of that, applying it where it makes sense, mostly on the defense platforms, the tooling. But I think peripheral to this conversation opens up a whole nother can of worms. But business owners should also be looking at it from as ways to augment existing business process. Right? How can we use this as a force multiplier to either streamline or automate existing processes and give our staff time back in their day to focus on what's important. Again, a whole nother conversation, but from a advisory perspective, and as it relates to AI, very much should be part of the conversation to some extent. Um, you know, um, and then at the end of the day, we plan for the breach. Um, tabletop exercises, business continuity planning, right? Let's identify um, what is important to our business, what the process is, and what's our workaround for when it goes down, right? Let's get that in a document. Let's get that in a policy, and let's define who the stakeholders are for each of those, so that when it happens, we've got our marching orders and we know how to work around it. Just like we do with disaster recovery plans, right? When IT is spinning up the infrastructure, your business leaders should be implementing those workarounds to make sure that we're still at least somewhat productive, that we're able to maybe generate a little bit of revenue or at least keep our clients assured that we know what we're doing and we have things under controls. There's a lot of ways to prep for a breach or an incident like that. And we need to be implementing as many of them as possible. So, yeah. Oh, there we go. So, with that, I think, Kevin, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, appreciate that, Enrique. And one of the things that I like that you kind of brought up, especially when it comes to the incident response. Incident response isn't just, it's not just the responsibility of the IT organization. It's all encompassing. So it's everybody from the top level execs. What's the legal response? How is your cyber insurance carrier also going to be along for the ride? But how are all parts of the organizations working together in coming up with that response? And even with the tabletop exercises that you just did, a lot of organizations, they might have an incident response plan that they did, but those get dated really quickly, and it really needs to be updated on a annual to semi-annual kind of time frame as well. Um, in closing, just so you guys know who Aperture Cyber Services is, we're a division of a large global financial tech organization. Globally, we have close to about 22,000 employees, and there's a valuation of our organization of close to $30 billion. Um, Axure Cyber Service as an organization formed in 2020. It was in a reaction to what we were seeing in with cyber insurance policies. So organizations were having a very hard time getting those to renew since there was such an emphasis and a push to move from home. So we formed as an organization to help our customers stay insured, to make sure that they were always going to be solvent. Now, as an organization, we're close to about 250 employees, most of which are on the technical side. So we're seeing tremendous growth, and we've actually been recognized as being a top 30 MSP according to MSP 501. We've also received top recognition from some of the top security manufacturers like Rapid7, and we've been ranked as one of the most innovative brokers by Inside Honors. So we're an organization that exists to help reduce risks on a proactive way within our customers. And it's important to provide learnings like today, so you all can stay informed about the technology landscape, and you can make more informed decisions about your the future of your technology as well. So in closing, thanks everybody for joining. If you want to learn more about any of the things that were discussed, um, please reach out to your kind of client advisor, your account manager. We'd be happy to set some additional time to talk specifically how to implement these kind of things that Enrique was talking about in your own organization. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.